Welcome to the lecture on the Bhagavad Gita. Give me a moment here. I'm going to put a text on the screen. I'm going to presuppose, that you have read all the posted documents in iCollege pertaining to the Gita as well as the excerpts from the Gita. Gita is short for Bhagavad Gita. And I'm going to start by calling attention to a passage toward the end of the paper called Concepts of Hindu Concepts, that covers several concepts crucial to understanding the Gita. And toward the end, there's a segment called Bhakti Yoga. I'm quoting from Stephen Prothero here, a scholar of religion. And he remarks, as I quote here, in the Gita, Krishna lays out for the first time Hinduism's three different paths to moksha. In addition to the karma yoga of ritual and ethical action, and the jnana yoga of asceticism and renunciation, which is philosophical, there is now a third option, the bhakti yoga of love and grace. I'm going to use these three types of yoga, or three disciplinary approaches toward Hindu life, to structure my discussion of the excerpts of the Bhagavad Gita that I've asked you to read. So we're going to go through those excerpts, examining how the first part of the excerpts demonstrate the jnana yoga, actually the philosophical kind of yoga. And then we'll segue into discussion how the later parts of the Gita that you were assigned to read exemplify and expound karma yoga and bhakti yoga. Now, I have now switched texts to our excerpts from the Gita. As you know, the Gita opens with Arjuna, the great warrior, confessing really to his chariot driver, who he understands to be an avatar, a human embodiment of the great Lord Krishna. And he addresses Krishna and confesses that he cannot bring himself to kill. Now, the reason he cannot kill is expressed in chapter 1. And basically, without explicitly saying that the problem is bad karma, that's in essence what he's saying. That, let's look at 36, for example. The stanzas are numbered on page 1287. Page numbers up here, and we have the page number here. We have the stanzas numbered here. What joy for us in murdering Dhritarashtra's sons, O Krishna, for if we killed these murderers, evil like theirs would cling to us. The idea that the evil of the killing itself cling to one as though one is contaminated with evil is very much in keeping with the idea of karmic consequences. You're going to burden yourself with evil if you commit these murders. Let's see what he goes on to say. So we cannot in justice slay our kinsman Dhritarashtra's sons for having killed our people. How could we be pleased, O Madhava? Even if they, mastered by greed, are blind to the consequences of the family's destruction, of friendships lost to treachery, how are we not to comprehend that we must turn back from evil? And he goes on and delineates the consequences of this evil, and the consequences are profound and far-reaching. It's like a chain of consequences that he outlines in stanzas 40 and following. Finally, the very bedrock of social organization itself, which is the caste system, the system of organized duty, people organized into the levels of the hierarchy of positions in society, whereby people are prescribed their duties so that society functions in an orderly, effective manner. That will all be thrown out of balance and society will become dysfunctional. So 43, stanza 43, those who destroy the family, who institute class mingling, cause the laws of the family and laws of caste to be abolished. There are many complicated levels and ways of organizing society. I assure you that the translators have made a very deliberate choice here to use the word class in line 44 and caste in line 46. Point is that the entirety of society will be destroyed by this kind of destruction. Men whose familial laws have been obliterated, O Krishna, are damned to dwell eternally in hell, as we have often heard. Now, if you have read the essay about destinies after death, you know that predominantly in this belief system in which the Bhagavad Gita functions culturally, the predominant destinies of those who die are reincarnation, and for the privileged few, moksha. But with Hinduism, it's never either or, it's always both and. Hinduism contains within it a tremendous variety of beliefs, metaphysical concepts, spiritual beings, and religious ideas. It's not as though there are just a select few that constitute Hinduism. Rather, in a sense, it's tremendously syncretistic, and everything is in Hinduism. Everything you can imagine almost pertaining to religious belief systems, there's some kind of version of it in the Hindu tradition. So yes, Hinduism has its hells, and it even has the concept of being damned eternally to hell. If you are really, truly iniquitous, if you are really, truly a wreaker of bad karma, someone who truly acts outside the boundaries of required action and duties. And hence the reference here to people who have been so destructive that they are, quote, damned to dwell eternally in hell. But Arjuna is completely undone by this kind of almost a panic attack. It has elements almost of what we might today call a panic attack. that he experiences, a complete psychological breakdown on the battlefield where he cannot bring himself to participate. It is not a kind of cowardice where he fears for his own personal death, where he's afraid of dying himself. It is a fear born of the karmic consequences of wreaking such terrible destruction, the destruction that is incumbent upon him as a very accomplished archer on this battlefield. Now, what we want to look at is the initial advice to Arjuna from the god Krishna. And we can divide it into three different components. The first is this jnana yoga of asceticism and renunciation, the basic philosophical tenets and presuppositions of the Hindu cosmos, the Hindu metaphysical premises about the very structure of the universe. And this is a kind of philosophical yoga whereby you fix into your mind the true nature of reality, come to recognize it, and thereby achieve a state of being that elevates you out of the cares and concerns of the karma-ridden, sensory, perception-based, material, physical world. Elevates you out of it. Now, these precepts, these basic perceptions of reality were the basis of the renunciatory ascetic traditions that shaped the Brahmins' behavior. Those figures who lived in palaces, who lived at the top of society, who had servants doing all of their interactions with the worldly affairs for them. And the Brahmins at the top caste Brahmins, could afford to simply meditate on these truths of jnana yoga, meditate on them, and thereby achieve moksha, the kind of salvation that informs the Hindu worldview, as you know if you have read the document titled Key Concepts for the Bhagavad Gita. And it is the basic precepts of this jnana yoga, this yoga of meditation and removal from the cares of the world, that Lord Krishna undertakes to remind Arjuna of in the first segments of the Gita that we have excerpted among us. So what are some of these key points that are conveyed? Many of them are in chapter 2. So I want to go to chapter 2, which starts on page 1288. And the speaker here changes from Arjuna complaining, if you will, about how he cannot bring himself to do his duty as a warrior. He's a member of the warrior class, which is the class right underneath the Brahman class, caste, which is the supreme caste, the Brahmins. Arjuna is of the Kshatriya or warrior caste. And we switch from Arjuna to the God Krishna's wise words with chapter 2, 1288. As it's headed, the Lord said, "Although you seem to speak wisely, you have mourned those not to be mourned. The wise do not grieve for those gone, or for those who are not yet gone. There was no time when I was not, nor you, nor these lords around us, and there will never be a time henceforth when we shall not exist. The embodied one passes through childhood, youth, and then old age, then attains another body. In this the wise are undeceived. Contacts with matter, with the physical world, by which we feel heat and cold, pleasure and pain, are transitory, come and go. These you must manage to endure. Such contacts do not agitate a wise man, O bull among men, to whom pleasure and pain are one. He is fit for immortality. Now, in sum, what Krishna is telling Arjuna is that taking a person's life doesn't matter because you're only relieving that person of their body. And what is essential to them, which is their Atman, their divine spark that is, in a sense, Brahman itself, their Atman will be reincarnated. So, so in a sense, Krishna is reminding Arjuna of what his priorities should be. He should look at the eternal, unchanging world and realize that the world of matter and physicality and embodied selves is transitory and inessential and relatively unimportant, to such an extent that Krishna ends up using an analogy whereby the body is compared to clothing that one sheds. And let's go and look at that stanza. Stanza 22. Someone who has abandoned worn out garments sets out to clothe himself in brand new raiment. Just so, when it has cast off worn out bodies, the embodied one will encounter other bodies. Now, this may not be pierced by weapons, the essential self that, that survives the death of the body. That cannot be pierced by weapons, nor can this be consumed by flames. Flowing waters cannot drench this, nor blowing winds desiccate this. Not to be pierced, not to be burned, neither drenched nor desiccated, eternal, all pervading, firm, unmoving, everlasting, this. This has been called unmanifest, unthinkable, and unchanging. Therefore, because you know this now, you should not lament, Arjuna, should not regret or be sorrowful about taking people's lives. If you go back up to stanza 20, you'll see a repeated use of the pronoun it and then a shift. Okay, so you see my cursor there? That, well, tell you what, hold up a second. Okay, I want to use this fancy little drawing pen here if I can. It, it, it. And now we shift to this. This, 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 this. These are pronouns. What are they referring to? Let's look at the this ones. Whatever this is, it can't be pierced by weapons. It can't be hurt by anything physical. It's Brahman. Brahman. Go to the concepts document called Key Concepts for Bhagavad Gita. The demonstrative pronoun this and the regular object pronoun it here, subject pronoun, object pronoun it, all these pronouns that I've marked in yellow refer to Brahman. It's the thing that always persists, that is above and beyond and pervades the physical world. It is the ground of all being. And you're not going to damage it. Arjuna, go forth in the battle and kill whoever you will kill. You're not going to hurt Brahman. You will not hurt essential being. That essential being is unmanifest. Now, when it comes to death, stanza 27, death is assured to all those born, and birth is assured to all the dead. You should not mourn what is merely inevitable consequence. Beginnings are unmanifest, but manifest means in the physical world. Anything that you can perceive through your five senses in the physical world is made manifest to your five senses, to your physical body. The manifested world is the physical world. Beginnings are manifest, but manifest in the middle state and ends unmanifest again. What is your complaint about that? Somebody looks upon this as a marvel, and likewise someone tells about this marvel, and yet another hears about this marvel, and even having heard it, no one knows it. The one cannot ever perish. The one is Brahman. The one cannot ever perish in a body it inhabits, O descendant of Bharata. And so no being should be mourned, nor should you tremble to perceive your duty as a warrior. For him, there's nothing better than a battle that is righteous, and if by chance they will have gained the wide open gate of heaven, O son of Prita, warriors rejoice in fighting such as that. If you turn from righteous warfare, your behavior will be evil, for you will have abandoned both your duty as a Kshatriya, as a member of the warrior caste, which is the second highest ranking caste out of the four major castes, and below those are the untouchables. If you do that, you will have abandoned your duty and your honored name. People will speak of your disgrace forever, so you're going to have a bad reputation. Do you think of the Greeks' concept of kleos, the warriors, the great heroes' heroic reputation? That's being appealed to here, isn't it? Almost the Hindu equivalent, something comparable to kleos, which we're familiar with from the Odyssey. That's addressed here. If you turn from righteous warfare, you will have abandoned your duty and your honored name. People will speak of your disgrace forever, and an honored man who falls from honor into shame suffers a fate much worse than death. And there's 3 dots there, which mean that we're ending that segment of the Gita. Now, what do we think of these arguments? Let's take stock of where we've gone. I want to share with you something from some scholarship now. I'm going to quote from a scholar on this. Many readers of the poem have been somewhat taken aback by these arguments, which strike them either as inhumane or as merely appealing to the base desires of a warrior. Kill because it's your duty to. Kill because otherwise you will be sinful. Kill because if you don't, you will be called a coward. Kill because one has only to gain by doing so. And the Bhagavad Gita is revered as a great religious text. And indeed, this idea that human bodies don't matter because you're just going to be reincarnated again could be the kind of delusion that drives the next mass killer, mass shooter with his AR-15 at the mall. who cares? Bodies don't matter. I'll just take these people out. Is this the kind of quote unquote wisdom that is being proffered here? A couple of things that we can do to try to put a more thoughtful context around this early advice from Krishna in the Gita. First, bear in mind that he's laying the foundations, reminding Arjuna of the basic metaphysical foundations of the Hindu conception of the cosmos. And if it strikes one as problematic, it's possibly because these are unfamiliar concepts. But in the context of the entire tradition of interpreting the Gita and the entire context of Hindu thought, what seems appallingly offensive and inhumane here does take on a different resonance. One scholar says that what we're seeing here is a progressive technique in teaching, founded psychologically on the belief, I'm reading now, quoting, on the belief that at any given time one is capable of grasping and assimilating only those ideas or arguments that fit with your achieved level of understanding. Just as mathematics is learned first in terms of symbols and principles that might later be negated or transformed in advanced studies, so in matters of the spirit, a man begins with what he's capable of understanding, even though it will be later rejected. One of the fine subtleties of the Gita is the extensive use made of this progressive technique. Arjuna will be taught something by Krishna that is either aimed at his exact level of understanding and prompts him to action wherein the teaching is fulfilled, or at a level of understanding somewhat beyond him, but which he is able subsequently to assimilate into his experience. At still other times, Arjuna will grasp intellectually some truths given to him, but which, when they have become actual contents of his experience, turn out to be infinitely richer than he imagined. Spiritual experience, in short, not only fulfills but also transforms intellectual understanding. In order to understand the Gita, let alone to appreciate its artistic and spiritual efficacy, one must not take an argument and appeal a doctrine out of its teaching context. The low-level arguments, these are low-level arguments, the low-level arguments put forward in Chapter 2 serve merely to shake Arjuna out of his lethargy, his sort of laziness. He's not thinking properly, clearly. So these low-level arguments are justified for Indian thought by the spiritual results which they produce. So he's reminding Arjuna of some basic fundamental truths about the nature of the Hindu universe, and these foundations will be built upon by refinement and additional enriching, complicating concepts that will make them seem, in the larger context, hopefully more humane and less crude than they may come across at the early stage of the Gita's teaching here, if that makes sense. So the concept of the progressive technique helps us understand this. Also, you might take a step back and realize that the basic raw precepts of the cosmic understanding of any major world religion can be laid out in a way that will strike the newcomer, the outsider, someone from outside that religion, as crude, incomprehensible, outrageous, etc., and so on. Obviously, the same thing can be done with Christianity in any number of ways. You look, for example, at the problem of theodicy, not the Odyssey, which we looked at for early in this class, but theodicy, Theodicy. The problem of theodicy is the problem whereby you take a newcomer to Christianity might say, wait a minute, you're telling me that there's an all good God who's all powerful and yet presides over a cosmos that is pervaded by sin, evil, and suffering? How can this be? There are plenty of objections that one can make to the basic cosmological precepts that underpin any major world religion. Now, if you remember Jnana Yoga, I said this is the yoga of philosophical truth. And these basic truths about the difference between the relative unimportance of the physical world and the eternality of Brahman as the ground of all being that pervades all existence, within which all physical things live, great refinements and further arguments are built upon these basic precepts to create the rich philosophical tradition of Jnana Yoga that requires this meditative renunciation of the world, the physical world, and this meditating on Brahmanic reality that the Brahmins, the top caste, have the opportunity and the luxury to pursue. Jnana Yoga is for the Brahmin caste. Someone like Arjuna, who is a notch down, like one caste level down from the Brahmin caste, who is a warrior, cannot afford this withdrawal from the world. He has to act. He cannot afford to renounce the world. He cannot afford to meditate on these Jnana Yoga truths that Krishna has laid out for him in chapter 2. So in chapter 3, Arjuna challenges Krishna, and look at the nature of the challenge here. It coheres with, it fits, it's of a piece with chapter 2. He's laid out these truths, but Arjuna says, if you regard the intellect, knowledge, understanding of the nature of a reality, if you regard the intellect as superior to action, why urge me, O handsome-haired one, into actions so appalling? He's returning to the problem of engaging with the physical world and killing. By your equivocating speech, you seem to self-contradict yourself. You take one position and you take another position. So he's really accusing Krishna of BSing him in a way. Equivocating speech. My mind is confused. Tell me this one thing and clearly, by what means may I reach the best? How can I do what is best expected of me? And then Krishna teaches him the karma yoga, the yoga of action. Now, the essence of chapter 3 is foreshadowed or anticipated toward the end of chapter 2. Notice there's a bit of dialogue toward the end of chapter 2, page 1291, where Arjuna asks Krishna, tell me, how may I know the man steady in his wisdom who abides in meditation? How should that one sit, speak, and move? Krishna replies, when he renounces all desires entering his mind, Arjuna. Actually, I want to go back to stanza 47. Your concerns should be with action, never with an action's fruits. It is what benefits you gain from the action. These, the desire to get something for yourself, should never motivate you with some satisfaction, the enjoyment that one gets from vengeance. This should not motivate you. The desire for the plunder that one gets from warfare, because we're talking about a warrior here. The desire for plunder should not motivate you. The desire for power, gaining power should not motivate you. The desire to gain political goals should not motivate you as a warrior. Do not concern yourself with the fruits of the consequences that will benefit you from your action. This should not motivate you, nor attachment to inaction. Established in this practice, act without attachment. That is key, this concept of detachment, detached action, unattached to your own physical-based appetites. That is key to the kind of warrior that Arjuna is supposed to be. Unmoved by failure or success. Equanimity is the discipline of karma yoga, the yoga of action. Equanimity is this kind of yoga, this kind of discipline. Action is far inferior to the practice of higher mind. Seek refuge there, for pitiful are those moved by the fruit of action, who act out of selfish desires, in sum. Look at stanza 51, and you can see a reference to moksha itself, the escape from the cycle of rebirth and living life and then dying and then being reincarnated and reborn and living another life. Having left the fruit of action, detached yourself from your selfish desires, but still doing what you must do, because you do have duties that are prescribed to you by your caste and your position in society. Having left the fruit of action, the wise ones yoked to a higher mind are freed from the bonds of rebirth and go where no corruption is. When your higher mind is crossed over the thicket of delusion, you will become disenchanted with what is heard in the Vedas. The idea that you must detach yourself, that you must be still and meditate all day, for example. The older ritualistic knowledge embodied in the Vedas is useless for liberation of the individual self or soul from the bondage of karma. Footnote is important there. He's distinguishing the karma of action from jnana, from jnana yoga, where you remove yourself from the world and just sit and meditate on Brahman and how the physical world doesn't matter. That Brahman, that higher caste way of reaching Brahman, he's renouncing that, Krishna is. And he's saying you must act, go ahead and do what you act, but do it in the right frame of mind. And he pursues this whole concept then in chapter 3 in far greater detail in chapter 3. Now, let's look at some key passages. I'll tell you what, this ideal of the warrior as detached from the passions and the emotions that seem inseparable from violent behavior. This notion is actually quite familiar to us in various artifacts of popular culture today, contemporary popular culture. And in particular, we encounter these classic teachings from the Gita. We encounter versions of them in, for example, Star Wars. The Jedi. The Jedi are disciplined in a way that recalls this kind of detached discipline of the use of violence that we're seeing here. So let me see if we can look at a clip here.
Premonitions. Premonitions. someone you know? Someone close to you? Yes. Careful you must be when sensing the future, Anakin. The fear of life is a path to the dark side. You won't let these visions come true, Master Yoda. Death is a natural part of life. Wish for those around you. The Force. Mourn them, do them, do not. Attachment leads to jealousy, the shadow of greed. What should I do, Master Yoda? Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
Now, I don't know how that came across that YouTube clip. I don't know how it worked, but if it worked, if you could hear it, what's happening in that passage is the great Jedi Anakin Skywalker is confessing to the wise, greatest of all Jedi's, the diminutive figure Yoda, that he is tempted to strike out in violence to save those he loves from premonitions, visions of the future that show the ones he loves, in particular Padme, the woman with whom he is in love, they show her becoming in danger of death. Yoda counsels him that if the forces of the cosmos take someone we love from us and we can't do anything about it, then we have to accept that and don't try to strike out in anger or fear against what we cannot change. If we strike out in fear and anger, then that is, quote, a path to the dark side, counsels Yoda. And he actually uses this idea of actually counsels Anakin to be detached from his passionate emotions. Now, this idea that one can find the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita exemplified in various themes, characters, and plot lines of the Star Wars saga is not just something that struck me. It's actually been written about by, for example, Dr. Jeffrey D. Long, professor of religion and Asian studies at Elizabethtown College, who has his PhD in religious studies from the University of Chicago, and also a book by Stephen Rosen called The Jedi in the Lotus. So this has been written about by people far more authoritative on these issues than I am. But it's useful to see sometimes films, literary works, and in this case, a very popular fantasy sci-fi franchise, illustrating some of these ideas in powerful, popular characters. Let me read you this from Jeffrey D. Long's article available on the web called Hindu Themes in Western Popular Culture, A Tale of Two Georges, Part 2. The story of Anakin's fall from being a great Jedi into the evil Darth Vader. Ultimately, he becomes Darth Vader, right? The story of Anakin's fall expresses another deeply Hindu theme, the theme of the perils of attachment. In the Star Wars universe, we are basically all good, except perhaps for the Emperor. And as in Hinduism, the soul is essentially pure. It turns to evil because of avidya, or ignorance of its true nature. Thinking itself limited, the soul comes to feel fear. And in the words of Yoda, quote, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And that quotation from Jeffrey D. Long's article is right out of the clip that I just tried to show you, if it came through on the screen okay. Now, Anakin's original fear is fear for the loss of his mother. He is separated from her in the first film when he goes as a young boy to join the Jedi Order. He has no contact with her for many years. In the second film of the precursor trilogy, in the second film, he begins to see premonitions of her death. Fearing for her, he rushes off to his home planet of Tatooine to find he is too late. Having been attacked by a group of desert bandits known as Tusken Raiders or Sand People, his mother dies in Anakin's arms. Now filled with fury, he uses his warrior skills to destroy the entire Tusken village, sparing not even the children. This is his first turn toward the dark side. He succumbs to the passions of gratifying his vengeful feelings. And that is going to turn loose the negative power of the Force in him. If he were to follow the advice of Krishna to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, he would have acted with detachment from the fruits of his action, and he would have been liberated from the dark forces that entangle him and ensnare him and ultimately turn him into Darth Vader. Let's look at a couple other passages where Krishna very much echoes the wisdom of Yoda. Certainly, stanza 19 in chapter 3. I say chapter 2, chapter 3. Therefore act without attachment in whatever situation, for by the practice of detached action one attains the highest. Stanza 37, page 1295. Know, the blessed Lord Krishna said, know that the enemy is this, desire, anger, whose origins are in the quality of passion, all-consuming, greatly harmful, as fire is obscured by smoke or by dust a mirror's surface. The grammar there is a bit tangled for the sake of the poetry. He's saying, as fire is obscured by smoke and a mirror's surface gets obscured by dust, or an embryo is obscured by its membrane, so this is covered up by that. The emotions, these passions, are being compared to smoke, dust, and an occluding, obscuring membrane over an embryo. Knowledge is constantly obscured by this enemy of the wise, this desire, these passions. They are an insatiable fire whose form, Arjuna, is desire. The senses, mind, and intellect are the abode of desire. So the senses and the mind and even the intellect are infected by desire. As it is said, having obscured knowledge with these, it deludes the embodied one. When you have subdued your senses, then, O bull of the Bharatas, kill this demon of desire, the destroyer of all knowledge and discernment. Senses are said to be important, but mind is higher than they are, and intellect is above mind, but self is greater than all these. So, knowing it to be supreme and sustaining the self with self, slay the foe whose form is desire, so hard to conquer, Arjuna. In these stanzas, 42 and 43 in particular, you see this hierarchy of human faculties. The senses are at the bottom, our basic five senses that interact with the physical world, connect us to the physical world, which is impermanent and associated with Brahman's dream, the kind of delusory component of reality. Mind is above that. That's the part of our mind that interacts with our senses. Intellect is the reflective and reason-based capacity of ourself, but even that is not the highest. The highest, where we realize our best potential as human beings, is at the level of the self with a capital S. Capitalization, the use of uppercase and lowercase here is not at all a typo. You need to understand that that's done deliberately by the translators. Self with the lowercase is your psychological identity, your ego-driven self, your personality, and your character, your moral character and your personality. The self with the capital S is your Atman, that component of you that is the spark of Brahman, your divine self, your highest potential. So you sustain the self with a small s, with the self, capital S. Slay the foe whose form is desire, so hard to conquer, Arjuna. And that self, which is at the top of the pyramid, if you were to put this in a sort of a pyramid, that is the capital S, self. What we have laid out here then so far is the yoga of action, karma yoga, which emphasizes this reaching to a higher state where you act out of selflessness. But how do you get the strength, the spiritual strength to renounce those desires that are so that pull you into the dark side, to make an allusion to the Star Wars here? How do you do that? Where do you get the strength? This is where the third kind of yoga that I wanted to discuss in our examination of these excerpts from the Gita. This is where the third kind of yoga, the bhakti yoga, comes into play. Bhakti yoga is well explained in brief form in the Hindu concepts or concepts for the Gita document. And I want to review it quickly here, and then we'll look at some passages, and that will conclude our lecture. Yoga can be translated as discipline, and the term can refer to any of several forms of disciplinary conduct that are designed to lead the practitioner to moksha, to liberation from the cycle of rebirth and life and death, and rebirth and life and death, that cycle of reincarnation. Most traditional forms of yoga discriminated against women and any man born into the lower castes because these disciplines, think jnana yoga and even karma yoga, they required meditative, ascetic, and renunciatory, where you renounce your desires, for example. Renunciatory, think renunciation. I renounce, that's the root word in this word, renunciatory. Renunciatory lives that average people simply could not afford to live. Most Hindus had to behave in ways that mired them in the world of Maya. Maya is the temporal physical reality, the world that is born and thrives and then dies and deteriorates. Samsara, which is that cycle of life and death closely related to Maya. And bad karma, which is the law of consequences, the moral law of consequences. Merchants made expedient business deals that prioritized profits over people. Servants had to obey corrupt masters. Warriors had to kill people, as we see with Arjuna's dilemma in the Gita. Women were seen as vessels of sensuality and carnality. It's a tremendously patriarchal society that informs this work of literature and traditional Hindu life. So women were seen as inferior because of their embodiment of the world of the senses and physicality. And so on. So most Hindus then felt a sense of futility and resignation. They wondered whether they could ever achieve moksha. To address this problem, the Bhagavad Gita teaches, it moves, and you can see Krishna in his teaching, in even the excerpts we have, you see Krishna moving toward this third form of yoga. The Gita teaches a form of yoga known as bhakti. And here I want to quote Stephen Prothero, who's one of the best-selling writers on religious matters in publishing today. And he did start his career as a professor of religion right here at Georgia State University before he returned back to the north, some big university up in the Northeast. Stephen Prothero writes, as Hinduism developed, ordinary people decided that this frustrating situation was not enough. Women and lower caste men wanted to reach out and grab the brass ring of moksha. They wanted it in this lifetime, and they did not want to be forced to give up family and friends, sex and success to get it. So beginning around the time of Jesus, beginning of the modern era, Hinduism moved in a more popular direction referred to today as bhakti yoga, or the discipline of devotion, end quotation. In the Gita, back to the quotations from Prothero, Krishna lays out for the first time Hinduism's three different paths to moksha, in addition to the karma yoga of ritual and ethical action, and the jnana yoga of asceticism and renunciation, the philosophical religion based on those precepts that we saw covered in a rather disturbing way early in the Gita, those philosophical precepts. There is now a third popular option, bhakti yoga of love and grace. Here's the key to understanding the essence of bhakti yoga. Remember the concept of Brahman. It is impossible to have a devotional interpersonal relationship with Brahman because Brahman is an impersonal deity. Impersonal because you are yourself Brahman in a sense. Brahman is all things. Sometimes people use the word pantheism there. I think it's a misleading word, so I stay away from the word pantheism. Brahman is, I think, more complex and rich concept than pantheism denotes. But there is a sense in which Brahman is all things. So how can an interpersonal, intersubjective, nurturing devotional relationship with the divine, with some kind of deity, with some kind of God, how can that develop within Hinduism? Well, the answer is, of course, given through the fact that while in a sense some conceptions of Hindu reality emphasize the one monistic figure of Brahman, the non-dualistic Brahman. At the same time, as you know, if you know anything about Hinduism, it is also a polytheistic religious tradition with a plethora, a vast array of many different deities, gods, and goddesses. There's a vast Hindu pantheon who are often regarded as emanations of Brahman, as everything else is. So you can develop a relationship with any of these gods or goddesses, and in particular, in the Bhakti tradition, in particular with Krishna, because he is the great exponent of Bhakti Yoga as taught in the Gita. And Krishna puts it this way from the Barbara Stoller Miller translation in a passage of the Gita that we do not have in our textbook and that I did not post in the Norton excerpts because it's not there. But Krishna does say in the Gita, if they rely on me, Arjuna, Women, commoners, men of low rank, even men born in the womb of evil, reach the highest way. Keep me in your mind and devotion. Sacrifice to me, bow to me, discipline yourself toward me, and you will reach me. So, and in our concepts in iCollege of the Gita, this is page 1293. Nourish the gods with sacrifice, and they will nourish you as well. By nourishing each other, you will reach the highest good. And as scholar Jeffrey Parender explains, sacrifice here refers not primarily to sacrificial rituals, but rather to a sacrificial attitude and state of consciousness in which everything you do to fulfill the obligations of your caste is done out of devotion to Krishna and not for self-promotion or self-gratification. This is why chapters 3 and 6 in our, I think we don't have 6 in this, but chapter 3, we do have some excerpts from 6. Yeah, we do have some 6. Chapters 3 and 6 in our Gita excerpts emphasize detachment from selfish desires in all you do. John Renard explains it this way: the way to cessation of the cycle of rebirth, which is another word for moksha, according to the Bhagavad Gita, lies in learning to perform all one's actions without egotistical concern for self-gratification, for their fruits, by living out one's own share of the Dharma purely because it is one's Dharma. That is your duty as stipulated by your place in society. That level of detachment is still very rare and difficult. So even that karma yoga is difficult. Popular devotional Hinduism in the epics, the Gita is part of one of these epics, part of the Mahabharata, and the Puranas, therefore adds an ingredient in the interest of making all this a bit more accessible. Help is available in the form of love and grace if one will only surrender totally to one's chosen deity in selfless devotion known as bhakti, which literally he translates as participation. And I think that the final stanzas of the excerpts, which are not the final stanzas of the Gita, what we have at the end of our excerpts on page 1301 that I posted, this is not the actual ending of the Gita. There are a total of 18 chapters, and what you're getting here is the end of the 11th chapter. So just so you understand that. But this is the end of the 11th chapter. It's the end of our excerpts, and you can see how it very much emphasizes this notion of bhakti yoga. Not by studying the Vedas, that would be jnana yoga, this austere philosophical meditative yoga. Not by studying the Vedas, these ancient philosophical texts, nor even by austerities, giving up, living the ascetic life and giving up all physical pursuits and detaching oneself from real life and the action required to live in the world. Not by austerities, and not by gifts or sacrifice, not by rituals in the temple. That's not the way that I, Krishna, can be seen as you saw me in the theophany that precedes this. If you really understand who he is what it means. See me as I really am. But by devotion undisturbed, that's the bhakti yoga, devotion, the yoga of devotion. By devotion undisturbed, that's the way I, Krishna, can be truly seen and known and entered into, Arjuna, O scorcher of the enemy. Whoever acts for me depends on me devoutly, without attachment or hatred for another being, another physical being. That spiritually minded person comes to me, O son of Pandu. And I think that's a good way to end the excerpted sections with the last final stanzas of the 11th chapter. And with that, I've run this lecture over an hour, so I'm going to stop it there.